Greetings, my fellow Americans, and welcome to another episode of the Great Montana Conspiracy Podcast. I am your host, Ron Glick. To be honest, I'm really not feeling up to doing this tonight, but I just had a really heck of a week, but it needs to be done. And so I'm here just to get it out of the way. If you are watching this video on YouTube or any other platform where you can like and subscribe, please do so. Share the video, share previous videos. We do need to affect change, and this is how we do it. As always, if you're watching this video and there's not a text attached to it, feel free to visit us on monspiracy.podbean.com, which is where this podcast originates. Or of course, you can also look on YouTube for the Great Montana Conspiracy Podcast, because the text will be attached to that as well. Tonight, I want to talk about helping others, and more specifically, the risk that entails. As I said, I feel this is going to be one of those difficult videos for me. This is going to be one of those videos that are hard to do because they're emotional and a lot of emotions are tied into it. And if I'm being completely honest, I'm just feeling really beaten down this week. I mean, everything's just wrong, and I don't have the strength to be here to do this. But I made a commitment to do it, and I'm here. So here I am. I'll talk about the reasons for why I'm feeling this way, because it's part of this video. Because they do relate to what I'm doing here tonight. For those of you who are hoping for another Great Montana Conspiracy lecture on the mechanics of the Great Montana Conspiracy, the levels of corruption in the government, and everything else, sorry, that's not what we're going to be doing tonight. Tonight we're going to be dealing with, or today, wherever you're watching this. As a reminder, I record these on Mondays and Friday nights for release on Tuesdays and Saturdays. Whenever I say night, it is actually, for me, Friday night. So whenever you're watching this, just keep that in mind. I'm just hoping I can get through this. I'm trying to stay focused so I can. These kind of episodes tend to break me down emotionally. There's been a couple of them I've tried to start doing and haven't been able to finish. And if I'm being honest, I'm really wondering whether I can keep doing this. Whether it's worth the risk. Whether it's worth what I'm doing, accomplishing anything at all, other than just provoking people. Making the corrupt people who are in power more corrupt and more upset, or just flat out just yawning and moving on because they don't care. I started this podcast back in July of last year, 2021. I started with an audio look back at a couple of videos I made about Frank Garner as I worked on how to do the video and how to get this set up. I'm still not that good at it. I don't have a lot of spanky special graphics. Still haven't figured out how to do split screens for interviews. Still haven't figured out how to do some of the critical, essential things that I see so many people doing on YouTube that I have no clue what I'm doing. But while I was trying to get things set up and learning how to do the basics, I posted a couple audios, and then went back and I posted the video versions of them. My first video was actually posted on August 12th of last year. And my first original content for this podcast was on August 17th, and I have successfully and managed to get 2 episodes out a week ever since. So it's been 8 months now, and I just cannot see what I've really accomplished. I have over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, but I'm lucky if I get a dozen views per episode. There's been some episodes that just really taken off. The Angela Townsend episode, as an example, has gotten over 100 views. Other episodes have gotten some pretty significant traction. And I had traction before I started the podcast, so I had some subscriber base before, not 1,000, but I had some subscriber base before from videos I posted previously. So, but no matter, I've been plugging away at this for 8 months now, and no one seems to be doing anything with any of the information I've presented. I've only garnered more attacks. The whole reason why I did the aforementioned Angela Townsend podcast was because Angela Townsend tried to shut down my podcast. So it required a response. It required a public, notice that this is why I mentioned her, this is what she has done, and here's the evidence behind it. It was necessary. It gave me a place to be, but I've gotten more tags. I got accused of being Hitler a couple weeks ago. That was nice. Yeah, I got accused of I removed the comment because there's just no justification for that, to imply that I'm Hitler. I don't even know where the rationality is. There's just an insult and a slight, and I just don't need that kind of stuff. I welcome comments, constructive comments, not comments that are designed to insult, degrade, humiliate, demean, whether me or anyone else I'm talking about. I mean, I may talk about Mike McGrath as an example, and I do not have at all the least amount of respect for the man. But if someone wants to get on my comment section and start calling him, derogatory terms, calling him, pardon the language, a nigger, or something equally derogatory that's not appropriate, I'm going to remove that comment. Just heads up. I want constructive comments, sure. And again, there's that issue. No one's even responding to my videos. No one's commenting. No one's offering the constructive criticism that I was hoping to elicit. I want to start conversations with these subtopics. And no one's talking about it, at least not here. And if they are talking about it, they're not talking about it within my realm of knowledge, and therefore I don't know what's being said, whether there's any influence, whether anybody's making any changes, or whether I'm just provoking people who have power over me, who have corrupt influence and power over me, and I'm just poking the bear. Certainly nothing has improved in my life as a consequence of doing these videos. It hasn't strengthened any of my legal challenges, nor does it seem to have drawn any official urge to fix the corruption. There's no federal oversight, there's no federal inquiry, there's no politician or official coming to me and saying, hey, I want more information on what you're talking about, this is something we need to fix. In fact, all I seem to do is elicit the world at large as a collective shrug. In fact, on March 23rd, my motion for reconsideration is officially deemed denied. This podcast is a couple days later, and I just haven't had the gumption to write a simple notice of appeal. It's a one-page little blurb. I'm appealing this decision. It's time to appeal again. But it's just going to go through the same process. All that's going to happen is Mike McGrath is going to use his influence over the state Supreme Court to issue another non-citable opinion that is going to uniquely deprive me of civil liberties that nobody else is deprived of. I'll lose on grounds, once again, that are applied only to me. And then I'll go to the U.S. Supreme Court and ask for certiorari review, and I'll fall into the 92% of cases that aren't heard every year. So in other words, I will spin my wheels on the same trodden path and end up precisely where I am now. Still a political prisoner, still under threat of revocation, sometime over the next 2 years. Still under threat of being returned to prison for 15 years. Like I said, what am I really accomplishing here? Before I start, I want to make it clear, I am fully aware that there are those out there, like Angela Townsend, like Mara, like Mike McGrath, like so many people. I don't know. I honestly don't know if Mike McGrath watches my podcast. I'm probably less than an ant to him. He has all the power and doesn't even have to pay attention to me, other than every so often he has to write ridiculously stupid orders that he doesn't have to have be citable, and therefore he doesn't have to worry about being challenged or contested. But there are those who do take great pleasure in my suffering. By showing how much I'm hurting, by talking about what I'm going to talk about tonight, I know it encourages them. It makes them feel they've accomplished something. A victory of sorts. We're hurting Ron, keep it up. Look, he's hurting, we can just keep pushing him, we can keep pushing him, he'll eventually give up, he'll eventually collapse. Maybe he'll kill himself. There's people out there who literally, I know, feel this way about me. I've done nothing to deserve it. other than standing up for my civil rights and my truth and the honesty that I've been trying to portray and the corruption I've been trying to expose. But there are people who don't want the truth out there. They don't want the corruption exposed, and they don't want me speaking. So yeah, they're happy when I hurt. And I can expect them to sit back and laugh and deride and everything else, because they're going to sit back and say, oh, look, oh, poor little Ron, he's crying. Oh, poor little Ron, he's going through this. Big deal. He's a nobody. He's less than nobody. We've got him in his place. He can't do anything. And sometime in the next 2 years, they're going to make sure to try to extend that sentence to make sure I remain under their control after that 2 years. Wicked people take pleasure for the misery they cause, and the misery they get to witness others causing. It gives them a sense of accomplishment. It encourages them to keep misbehaving. So yes, I know all of this, but it's not going to stop me from showing the personal side of the Great Montana Conspiracy. It's not going to make me pretend to be strong when I'm not, and I'm not strong. It's not going to stop me from showing the pain I feel. And this week has been a hard one. It really, really has. And there's times I have to stop and just get to the reality of it. Stop lecturing and just come at you with everything. Not pretend to hide behind professionalism or staunchness or whatever adjective you want to use. For starters, this whole reason for this topic came from a disagreement I had with my producer, Bill. And I'm not saying he was mean, he was in any way inappropriate. Disagreement means disagreement. We disagree on what constitutes risk and what is acceptable risk. But it definitely raises the old emotions, and it raises the fears, the anxieties, and it definitely gets me thinking, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Technically, the emotional part of the roller coaster started before the discussion with Bill. It was that emotional roller coaster that prompted the conversation. But what drew it from a personal crisis to noteworthy, this podcast did start there. Now, a little background. As I've shared before, I am disabled. I have something called rheumatoid variant disease. It's a chronic joint pain disease. It limits my physical abilities, causes balance issues, loss of sensation, etc. I have to avoid frequent repetitive activity, strenuous activity. I can't sit for long periods. I can't stand for long periods. I'm standing for this podcast, and I'm constantly moving back and forth, mostly because if I try to stand in one position, it hurts. It causes physical pain to stand here. I could be sitting here and go through the same problem, but it looks a little better, I think, standing and moving back and forth than it does sitting in a chair and fidgeting. So, if you're ever wondering why I'm walking back and forth and pacing back and forth, it's because I'm trying to relieve pressure on my joints, on my hips, my knees, and everything else. And my lower back and my upper back and everything else. This disease is mainly caused by inflammation in my joints, putting pressure on nerves. This is considered an autoimmune disease. Essentially, I have an overactive immune system that attacks my joint fluid. It's a debilitating disease that gets progressively worse over time. Literally every year, it's worse than the one before. And this has been a very, very hard year for me, physically. So the emotional stuff on top of it doesn't help. I live on SSI, which for those not in the United States, is supplemental security income. It's a disability form of income, and it's how I pay my bills. I write books, but I make no money at that. I've got 25 books, and you'd think I'd make money at it. I don't. Just like I don't earn income from this podcast. It's a meager existence, as I have no money for extravagances. In all honesty, I barely get by month to month. And with stagflation from this pandemic right now taking over this last year, I'm literally living on credit cards. I've never had to live on credit cards before. Never. I never thought I would have to. I've never been an extravagant person. I live off my necessities. I do what I have to do. If I have an emergency, like a car breaks down or something like that, that's what a credit card is for. I've had to live with monthly expenses off my credit card just because, I mean, gas prices right now, insane. Thankfully in Montana we're only at $3.99 a gallon. There's places in the country it's $6.50 a gallon and higher. It's absolutely insane. But I have a 96 Ford Aerostar that is the worst gas guzzler I have ever owned. So $4 a gallon is still killing me. Food costs, basic costs, shortages, having to order things online because they're not available in stores, all of these add up. All of these add up. And then of course when you're online you have to have a credit card. So it's just, and everything's costing more and everything's dragging it out. So I'm literally living on credit cards to try to survive, wondering what I'm going to do when my credit limits tap out, and they're pretty darn close. We aren't getting any more, but when we got those stimuluses, I paid off my credit cards so I could renew the cycle. We aren't getting stimuluses anymore. So as a consequence, there's no more money coming in, really. Any money I get that's above and beyond what I do goes to my credit cards to pay them off so I can try to keep living on my credit cards. It's a really bad existence. But they've always been an emergency resource to me, but here I am not able to use it for that. And I can't keep up without them. And keep in mind, the reason I am on SSI to begin with, the reason I'm on supplemental security income is because probation and parole made it impossible for me to work. I couldn't return to my former employment. Wasn't allowed to work retail or everywhere in the public. Physically, I couldn't handle arduous or work labor jobs. They blocked my ability to even pursue book rehab. They backed me to the corner. The only income I could get was Social Security. And I've been trying for over 10 years to launch my publishing. That's why I've written 25 books. Because I don't want to be on Social Security income, supplemental security income. I don't want to be on disability. I want to be able to have a sustainable income of my own. So it's not a desire to live off of this. I mean, trust me, I live off of like $800 a month. That's it. I have to pay rent, I have to pay bills, I have to pay everything else. Insurance, try to keep gas in my car, try to do all of that on $800 a month. I don't have roommates, I don't have people helping me cover my bills. That's it, that's my income, ladies and gentlemen. That's it. That's the only thing I can rely on. If I get somebody to give me, like, oh, would you give me a ride? I'll give you $5 for gas. It goes into my gas tank. If I do something for someone and they give me a little money to like, here's $10, here's $20, whatever, it goes in my gas tank 90% of the time, or it goes to pay off a credit card bill, or it goes off. I don't go out and buy a whole lot of luxuries. This is just a terrible life. I sustain myself day by day by day, and I'm not going anywhere. And working on this podcast and working on anything doesn't really help that. I'm just doing it. Guess I don't know any better. Of course, then Dave Edwards sits back and tries to say that I'm making it all up. I'm trying to make people feel sorry for me or some other stupid excuse to try to make sure I didn't have any money to support, because if I didn't have any money to pay off the original penalties for my conviction, he could have returned me to prison. And he wanted that. No income means I can't pay court fines, which means I go back to jail and to prison. Thankfully, I was able to take care of that. But I was in an auto accident, was able to pay off the outstanding bills for that auto accident settlement. Yes, I pay off my bills. I don't go out and buy a new jet ski. I don't go buy a new car. I pay off my bills, which what everyone should do. But SSI may have saved me from my fate, but it's not a great source of income. Anyone who makes it sound like people are living off the government dime, I challenge those very people to live off of $800 a month. Right now I get $840 a month, $841 a month. That started January 1st. Previously it was $794 a month. And there's a lot of years we don't get raises. We got a huge raise this year because of the rise in the cost of living, and it's still not enough because it's determined from the last year, and even then it's only based on salaries. It's not actually based on the actual inflation rates we're living through. It's an insufficient, proper gauge to determine what a livable, sustainable income is. And yet here I am trying to live off of it. And I would bring this up because being on disability, actually, I'm going off way too much of a tangent on the side issues and COLA and all that kind of fun stuff. But I bring it up because there is one advantage to being disabled. One real advantage to being disabled. It certainly isn't the pain I live with every day. It isn't the staggering lack of income. It isn't the limitations and obstacles I encounter every day from having a disability. No, I have a lot of free time. I have a lot of free time. Of course, free time for one person isn't free time for everyone else, because I choose to use that free time to help others. I am constantly on the move. I am constantly helping people. I'm going to the store for people. I'm helping people, giving people rides. I'm helping people fill out applications for food stamps, for Social Security. I'm helping them write up summaries for various different projects. I helped a friend write a business plan last year or year before. I mean, I'm doing all kinds of different things for people because I'm able to. A maxim I live by, always have, is that with ability comes responsibility. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's a variation off the Spider-Man maxim. With great power comes great responsibility. Well, I don't have great power. In fact, I don't even have power at all. But I have ability. It doesn't create great responsibility perhaps, but it does create responsibility in my mind. I feel personally that if I have the ability to help, I have a responsibility to help. That's what it means to be part of a society. That's what it means to be part of a community. I thank Kansas for teaching me that lesson. Not the words, not the maxim, because I kind of modified the original maxim to create one that fit my core beliefs, but the idea of community and the sponsorship that creates. If I can help someone fill out an application for SSI, or give them a ride, or help them go shopping, or just in general, any way I can, then I ethically feel a duty to try to help. Obviously there are boundaries. Nothing in this maxim makes me a slave, for instance. I have the ability to say no if helping would put me at risk of harm, or would hurt someone else, or the person who's asking is abusing my good nature in some way. If I have somebody that sits here and says, you did this for that person, you did this for me, this person, and I have 50 people, I was only one person. I don't have an entire volunteer, group of people that I can send off in various things. I'm one person, and I have limits. Therefore, there are boundaries. There's natural boundaries that must exist, and that's kind of a belief. But the bottom line is, I like to be useful. I like to feel useful. It's the primary reason why I do these podcasts. Not because I get a financial gain out of it, not because I really get any advantage at all from it. As I've mentioned, I certainly don't get, I don't have sponsors. I've tried working with a couple of sponsors, haven't nailed one down. It'd be great to have a sponsor, by the way, but haven't got one yet. I don't have any kind of residual income from this, but it's important information, and by providing it, I'm being useful. That's my primary motivation for doing this. Like I said, it's certainly not helping me, but I'm hoping that my words might one day help someone else. I mean, I go fishing in the summer and give 90% of what I catch away. I don't sell it. I don't hoard it. I keep it. And then I find people, hey, I've got some fish, and I give it away. I even host a neighborhood fish fry 3 to 4 times a year. I just grab the neighborhood people down the block in the Rosebriar Inn, which is another low-income facility here in town, say, hey, let everybody know I'm going to do a fish fry. I'm going to hook up a bunch of fish, and I'll bring them down plate by plate. And I just bring it outside, sodas. Everybody sits around and eats fish and drinks sodas. It's nothing elaborate. It's not like salads and bean casseroles and a whole thing. If everyone else wanted to bring stuff, great, but I cook up the fish and I just feed people. Because I know how to do that, and it helps people. It makes people feel appreciated. It builds community. These are things that are important to me. But this is where my producer and I disagree. So let me give you some background on what's going on, and this is the part that's really hard. And I'm talking about a personal area of my life that on the surface and everything else has absolutely nothing to do with the Great Montana Conspiracy. It's completely my personal life. But it's how this kind of thing impacts me and the risk that's associated with this that is what affects these podcasts and affects my emotional stability to continue, and my fear and my anxieties and everything else. So there's a girl. Okay? Yeah, big surprise, there's a girl. Ron has a girl in his life. Big surprise. Which I should make note, by the way. Okay. I'm going to make note real fast before I start talking about this. One of the harshest things about being a falsely convicted sex offender and being a compulsively honest person by nature is I can't hide what I've gone through. Which means I'm an open book. Not only have I published an autobiography about my experiences, but whenever I go online to try to find someone to date or meet somebody, I always disclose my background. Because it's important they know who I am, what's been said about me, and let them make the decision. I don't want to rope someone in and manipulate them into liking me or disliking me based on falsehoods or false perceptions. If they want to be with me, they need to know from the get out who I am, because I cannot be a dishonest person. But let's face it, I'm broken. This whole process has broken me. I have no finances, I have no good name, I have a felony that will hang over me for the rest of my life, forcing me to register. Anyone associated with me is going to feel that. Not to mention I'm forced to live in a community where people blacklist me and badmouth me and make up garbage about me all the time for their own personal benefit, their own personal gains, whatever they may be. I'm broken. I am the worst catch in the bunch. But what it comes down to, therefore, is the only people I really have a chance of attracting are people who have either experienced the so-called criminal justice system themselves or been around people who have and have endured it and understand what I'm living with. And unfortunately, 99% of the time, that's going to be the lower echelon. That's going to be the people who are also broken to some degree. So if you're looking to hear this next part and you're going to say, well, he could do better. He just should go find someone better. This is literally the first person in years who I haven't had a chance with. And obviously you're going to realize as I tell this story, I never had a chance. It was all a game. But I fell for it. I allowed myself to get emotionally entangled. And as a consequence, now I'm suffering horrifically. Because I actually get addicted to people. Not addicted to relationships necessarily, but I have people around me and I get used to them being around me, and then when they aren't around me, it hurts. I get attached to people. I enjoy people's company. I enjoy their presence in my life, and when I lose them, it hurts me physically. And then tie in an emotional component to it, and it's devastating to me. It's like breaking an addiction. It's like being forced to go cold turkey on an addiction. I don't have drugs, alcohol. I have people. And not just individuals, people. I'm getting ready to lose my friend Dawn, who's moving out of state in a month. And I'm like trying to hold myself together because I'm going to lose my friend Dawn. D-O-N, by the way, Guy. Because I'm going to lose my friend Dawn. He's moving away. And I may never see him again. And he's been such a strong and consistent part of my life for the last couple of years that losing him it's like breaking a routine for me. It's hard. So it's not just like I get addicted to emotional relationships, or I get addicted to people in general because I enjoy their company, I like being around them, and when I get used to having them around, not having them around, or being forced to be without them, it's hurtful for me. And I don't know how else to say that. But anyway, let's go back to what's going on. Okay. I did warn you. So there's a girl. I've been helping now for a couple of years. Her name's Nicole. And I'm just going to use first names because I need to separate people here. And it'd be really difficult to do that if I'm just using pronouns he, she, her, it, whatever. It's going to get really complicated if I try to do that. And I'm going to mess up the names if I try to make up fake names. So I'm just going to use first names, and that's all I'm going to use. It started with me giving her rides. I met her when I was out walking around Kalispell one night, and she was walking around Kalispell the same night. We struck up a conversation, and we got to talking, and I said, hey, if you ever need anything. And don't get me wrong, from that first night I was attracted to her. Did I ever think I should have shot with her? Heck no. I mean, like I said, I'm broken. Who really wants, to love the beast? That's really what I am. I am like the worst personification of a beast you can imagine, because I am the sex offender who won't even admit he's a sex offender. I mean, it's just horrific. I already had insecurities before. Now I'm like crippling insecurities about relationships or even asking someone out. But yeah, so I admit, from the first night I met her, I was attracted to her. Didn't make a move on her, didn't ask her out on a date, didn't try to do anything, just tried to get to know her. So we started giving her rides. Then when she moved out of state for a little while, lived with a boyfriend in Idaho. She still had to come back to Kalispell for medical because all her doctors were here. So I'd give her a place to stay. And purely platonic, she slept in the living room, I slept in my bedroom. Nothing going on there. No attempt to make anything go on there. I respect relationships. She had a boyfriend. So, I'll be clear, just so I'm up front with this and as fair and honest as I can. Nicole does have some mental health issues, but they're not developmental though. They're not like I don't want to say retarded because it's a bad word, but no developmentally disabled abilities, no anything like that. She has what are called abuse-centric sociopathies, which is to say she has suffered so much trauma and abuse in her life that she's developed severe social anxiety and fear responses. It can be crippling. They've gotten only worse over time. Sometimes she locks herself in her room or even the bathroom for hours or sometimes even days at a time because she's too afraid to come out. She does get treatment. She's, of course, very much when I was first associating with her and learning these restrictions on her and learning things she's been through, I was trying to help her, trying to counsel her, trying to build her self-esteem, try to help her gain confidence, all these factors. And I got to know her. And but with the same token, she's so conditioned to abuse, and this is going to become a factor in this story, that she's extremely susceptible to it. She's been so abused and so controlled and so tortured in her life that it's so conditioned to being controlled that she's incredibly suggestive. And that's 99% of the reason why we didn't work out, as you'll understand. I'm not like that. I can't be like that. I was raised around it. I'm completely just, it's so apathetic to, or so counter to what I am as a person. I was about building her self-esteem, making her independent, and these kind of people try to tear her down and make her dependent, make her reliant on them, make them be their only world, isolate them from the rest of the world so they're only dependent upon the abuser and the controller. Written an entire book on it. So yeah, go read it. I do, The Independent Domestic Objective. It talks specifically about the abuse-control relationships. I've counseled these relationships since I was 19 and was working in crisis hotlines and working in group therapies and being sponsors for AA and NA in California, in Bakersfield, San Diego, and Bakersfield. So I've worked with these people. I've counseled these people for decades. So watching her go through this, the last thing I'm going to do is try to add to that burden. I try to help her. I try to get her to see it, recognize it, gain independence, security, so that she doesn't have to become dependent upon somebody else. So she can possibly regain her sense of identity and self, and maybe overcome some of these fears and anxieties she's been crippled with. And I'm not going to say more history about what caused these traumas or anything else, because that's all private. But this bit about her social anxieties and her susceptibility to abuse and control are kind of need to know. for what goes on beyond here. So anyway, so eventually she came back to Kalispell. My friend, but she was homeless. She didn't have a place to go. I think she was living in her car, actually. And actually the car was her boyfriend's car from Idaho. But she came back here. My friend Jean had just inherited her mom's house, but it needed somebody to caretake it. Nicole had always been trustworthy and honest with me. I mean, come on. I've helped a lot of homeless people in my life. I've helped a lot of people. 9 times out of 10, when I give someone a shelter for the night, they steal from me. They steal from me, they take advantage of me, they abuse me in some capacity, and Nicole had always been absolutely upstanding and trustworthy. She'd never once given me reason to suspect her. So when this opportunity came up, I recommended her, and she accepted the recommendation and allowed her to move in. Now at the time I was not aware of this, but I have since learned that Nicole has had an on-again, off-again problem with drugs. At the time I recommended her, I do believe she was sober. I can say that she's never appeared high around me at that point in time. She would be around me for days at a time, and I'd never see her, I'd see her smoke, but I'd never see her light up. I never saw her go into the bathroom for extended periods of time to get high, anything else. She never, and like I said, I helped a lot of homeless people, I helped a lot of addicts, I helped a lot of people. I can recognize the signs of somebody who's high. I never saw those when she was around me before she moved in to the place for Jeans. But apparently the freedom of having a new home, it tipped her. She called back friends from her drug period of her life to live with her, to stay with her, and consequently she fell off the wagon and began to use again. It was a big hassle. I'm not going to go into the details of it because there is actually a limited space in this podcast, and there's no reason to go into it. But she had a serious spiral from the person I knew. She became a completely different person. The person who I had gotten to like, the person I'd been attracted to, the person who I had intelligent conversations with, the person who was someone who I genuinely wanted to be with. Although at that point in time I could never confess it. That person vanished in favor of a completely irrational, completely unstable personality type. And I since learned that was because of the drugs and the people she was hanging around with. Eventually we got her out of the house. It was a struggle. I won't lie about that. And I honestly thought I had lost my friend over all of this, between her behavioral shift and the way and the means by which we had to get her out through the court system. I thought I lost her. Well, a couple weeks passed. She was homeless again, living in a homeless shelter. But she remembered how I had helped her before and shut up at my door. And once again, she was sober. And she was back to the person who I'd gotten to know, the person I liked, the person I was attracted to. The loss of the house lost her these hang-ons, these hanger-ons, of people who were basically just using her for the house. And with them, with the drugs. And of course, she had to stay sober to be in the homeless shelter. And she professed that she wanted to stay clean. She wanted to get her daughter back, which I thought was incredibly important. No, by the way, I'm not allowed to be around girls. She had lost custody, she had lost all parental rights, but she wanted at some point to try to get her daughter back. And I told her, I said, you realize that conversations later on down the line, I've had with her since then, as we started talking about actually potentially dating. By the way, that conversation did come up, and I said, if you ever do try to get your custody back, because she's lost all parental rights at this point. If you ever do try to get your custody back, even if you don't get custody, if you just have visitation, I won't be able to be part of that until I'm past and over this restriction over my custody. Which she realized was a problem, and it did lead to us making this. That's, by the way, initially the reason why I filed for, one of the reasons not the only reason, one of the reasons I did file for early release when I did file for it was because she asked me to. I knew I wasn't going to get approved, but I was willing to do to show her what I was up against. So that was one of the reasons why I filed for the early release that I did, because she asked me to. I had considered it already, I laid the groundwork for it, but then retaliation started again. They started floating around, and I got fearful and said, I don't want to go through that again, I don't want to risk another revocation attempt, and so I held off. And then when she asked me to do it, I did it. But she's never really, by the way, pursued ever going after her daughter. She's too afraid of the guy that, her ex. She's too afraid of the abuse that she's endured from him and everything else to even try to reverse her loss of parental rights. But at any rate, so again, it's just a twisted thing. I want to go down that road and talk about it, but it's not necessary to this, and it is private. So I stepped in and started helping her again. She had professed that she wanted to change and become sober and stay sober, and that she was back to the personality that I liked, the personality I was attracted to. I helped her get into a new place. I helped her start an SSI application. I helped her set up the basics because she had no money nor income. Furniture, hygiene, clothes. Helped her go shopping. She had food stamps, so she was able to get food. I helped her with stuff she couldn't get. Did a lot of searching around for free items that people were giving away in the community, that kind of thing. I also helped her replace her phone and helped her pay the bill each month. And remember, I'm on a fixed income. This is a serious juggling act to be able to do this, even for $35 a month. That's how much I paid a month to keep her phone on. So, yeah, it wasn't an easy juggling act, but I did it because right now, with the pandemic that's going on, Social Security does not do in-person interviews. So if you don't have a phone, Social Security will seek to call you for an interview, and if you have no phone, you get denied. That was one of the things that was made clear in the application process, is you must have a phone number to be able to be reached, and if you cannot be reached at that phone number, then you lose your claim. You'll just get denied. So she had to have the phone. And so I rationalized the necessity of keeping the phone on for her. As I spent these months working with her, we grew close. She had broken up with her boyfriend. She wasn't seeing anybody. She confessed she was attracted to me. I confessed I was attracted to her. And we started talking about dating. Like I said, we talked about the fact, her daughter, and the fact that she's lost her parental rights to the daughter. But if she ever got into a custodial situation again, that I would have to step back. I couldn't date her at that point. It's one of my stupid restrictions. But we just started talking about it. We started talking about dating, and we had just decided that we were going to try to date. And then she gets on her mind, well, I think it's time for me to bring my ex back in my life. Her ex, Tyrell. Which she'd already told me about some pretty horrific things he'd done to her and how he had treated her. And I'm not going to go into them here because, again, they're private. So I was surprised by this. But I'm not the kind of person to control who the friends are, the people I want to date. You have to have the freedom to be able to say, okay, I trust you. And I really need to make this perfectly clear at this point. I have a long-standing history. Every single relationship I have had in my adult life has ended because I've been cheated on. Every single one. Not an exception. Every single one I have been cheated on. Every single relationship has ended because I was cheated on. So the idea that I recognize the necessity of allowing someone to maintain a friendship with an ex, I hope that demonstrates that I'm not trying to control her. Most guys, even people who aren't controlling or abusive, I mean, I've had so many friends tell me I was just stupid for letting her. I can't tell her she can't have her friends. It's not my place. But Tyrell came back in her life. I drove her to meet him. And they drove off, and I didn't see or hear from her for 4 days. And when I did, she was back to using again. Because Tyrell got her back on it. And she confessed she didn't want to stop. Since then, she has gone through brief periods of sobriety and periods of using. And I've tried to stand by her, I've tried to reason with her, I've tried to facilitate. At first it was just recreationally. It was in a capacity that wasn't every day, it wasn't something that she did all the time. She professed that she could control it. I said, well, and there are people who can, and I've witnessed it, who can be functional addicts. They can use and put it down and walk away from it and go work a 9-to-5 job and have no problems. But there are people who lose their lives to it, which is what she was pretty much doing when she was in Jean's house, was losing her life to it. But that was because she was surrounded by people who were using constantly, and therefore she was using constantly. And there is one thing I will say for Nicole. She tries not to lie most of the time. She still deceives and manipulates. In fact, being honest, even though she says she doesn't lie, she is not a good, honest person. She plays up the game of lies by omission. If she doesn't talk about it, she doesn't have to lie. Or she'll deflect. And she'll give an answer. If you ask her a question, she'll say something else entirely to try to deflect away from actually having to give the correct answer. As an example, when she disappeared for the first first 4 days with Tyrell, I asked her if she had slept with Tyrell. She would answer, "Why do you have to think like that?" Or, "Thanks for how that makes me sound." She didn't actually ever come out and admit it. It took a month, literally, to get her to finally admit that she had, by the way. And by that point, there had been 3 separate times that she had run off with Tyrell for multiple days. And each time I confronted her and said, you're running off with your ex and you're telling me you're not sleeping with him. And the second 2 times, by the way, they were camped out at her place. So she just wouldn't answer her door. She wouldn't answer her phone. His car was in the parking lot. They were obviously in there. Just wouldn't answer the door. And so she did finally admit, yeah, I did. Needless to say, this pattern has peppered our friendship ever since. We would break up, we would try again, and she would sleep with someone else. Only she would never admit it. She would just not answer calls or her door for days. And then Tyrell's car would be there every time for the first several months. Every time she'd go on her, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to answer the door, I'm not going to talk, his car would be there. Now, as I said, full disclosure, I have a long history of being cheated on. So, as Nicole started sleeping with her ex again, I began to get understandably jealous. I believe was understandably jealous. And when I say jealous, I'm not talking going into a rage. I'm talking about not trusting her and constantly confronting her. She would tell me she wasn't sleeping with Tyrell, or more precisely, deflect from admitting it. I would get upset and walk away from it all. If you can't answer, if you can't give me a straight answer, I'm done. I'm out of here. We had many, many fights over my feelings of jealousy. And I freely admit there are feelings of jealousy. But to be honest, I kind of feel I was justified. She can't tell me she wants to work on a relationship or be with me, then go and be with another guy. Am I right? And when she wants to be alone with another guy, if she wants to, after she admits that she slept with Tyrell, she still wants to be alone with Tyrell, and she still wants to be alone with other guys, and she doesn't want me there for it. She locks me out of her life completely while she's with these other guys, and I should not be jealous. I think I handled the emotion constructively. Like I said, I didn't rage. I didn't go off and fly off and break doors and windows and start beating people up, and that's just not who I am. But nevertheless, I most definitely was jealous. Because here was someone I liked, who I thought I was trying to build a relationship with. On again, off again, on again, off again. And she's sleeping, after the first time, she was never fully committed to me again. But she would keep saying she wanted to work on it, she wanted to work on it, she wanted to do it. And then she would go off and sleep with somebody. So it was real trust issues there. And eventually she started sleeping with other people too. And in each instance she would deny it and try to get me to come back to her. It's like, oh, you think wrong. You can't think like that. You can't think like that. You know, she'd always deflect. You know, one of the last guys, Danny, the only reason I found out she slept with him is because I came into her room and found a condom on the floor, or a condom wrapper on the floor. And she spent 4 hours, literally 4 hours, deflecting away from it. Well, how do you know it's mine? How do you know someone else didn't come to my room and sleep in it? How do you know? How do you know? I said, Nicole, it is your room. It is on your floor. Unless you're sitting here blowing up condoms as balloons, you slept with somebody. And after 4 hours, she finally admitted, yeah, I did. I just wanted to. This was after she had just got through telling me just 2 days before. Please be patient with me. I know it's been hard. I know it's been difficult. I want to be with you, but I want to make sure, I want to be sure of my feelings. I want to make sure this is what I really want. And then 2 days later, she's sleeping with Danny. So, yeah. Promises upon promises upon promises, and then breaching trust over and over again. And then withholding the information, and I can't begin to guess whether she slept with more people, and I just haven't figured it out. But now keep in mind, after the first couple of times, we were never really back together. And even for those short periods where you could possibly consider us together, we could never reconsider an item because it never lasted long enough. They were all very incredibly brief. But she still needed help because none of these other people were willing to help her. They weren't willing to drive her to appointments. They weren't willing to be reliable. They weren't willing to help her get to the grocery store or get her things she needed, to survive. They just wanted her for her, I really don't want to use the expression, but to get their dicks wet. Pardon the language. But that's really all they wanted. And once they got what they wanted, they left. Or they hung out and just sat there with her and whatever. But they certainly didn't stay around to take care of her. That was where I came in. And then, of course, you'd come back in. And once I had developed feelings, I didn't want to see her come to harm. I didn't want to see her starve. I didn't want to see her not get to her medical appointments. I didn't want her to not get her prescriptions refilled. These various different things that were really important. So yes, for the purpose of full disclosure, she pretty much walked all over me for 6 months. Okay, there's a lot of times I walked away and she would call me back and ask for help and I'd give in. And there were always the promises of trying again. And trying again never manifested, but it did tempt me enough to help. There were those boundaries I talked about earlier. I wasn't maintaining the boundaries. My emotions got wrapped up, I got entangled, I got hopeful. As I said, this was the first real person I hadn't even had a chance with in years. And I fell into the trap. I fell into the emotional quagmire. So about 3 months ago, she got a very, very bad infection in her arm. It was a nasty cyst there was no amount of draining that could fix it. It just kept filling up. It was horrid. It was obviously going to spread. I tried to get her to go to the doctor to get antibiotics, but she refused. There's a very real chance in this kind of thing to get sepsis, blood poisoning, blood clots, gangrene, and worse. She could fall into a coma. She could die. This is very literally something that's life-threatening, or could become life-threatening if she didn't treat it. I tried to help her for 3 days and then stopped. She stopped answering her door or her phone. So I let 3 more days pass, trying to get her to answer the phone, trying to get her to answer the door. On the 3rd day from not hearing from her, I called for a welfare check. Now, for anyone who does not know what a welfare check is, that's when you call the authorities and you say, hey, I'm worried about this person. Could you please go check on them? Now, this seemed to me like a very reasonable measure. I had known someone who I personally have walked into the house of somebody who had choked and died on the floor 2 to 3 days before. To me, visions of her being dead or in a coma were all I could think of. She had a massive infection in her arm that had only been getting worse. She had not answered her door or her phone in 3 days. So, like I said, my belief is this was reasonable. The response that happened was anything but. Now keep in mind, when I worked in California, I worked for crisis hotlines, I worked for NA, AA, I worked with counseling groups. Various different times I've had the necessity of calling in welfare checks, medical welfare checks. And when you call any medical welfare check in California, they sent an EMT, which is an emergency medical technician. They sent somebody trained in medical care to respond to a medical welfare check. Sometimes they would send a whole fire truck or even an ambulance, but at the very least they sent an EMT. They might send a police officer as a standby, but they would always send an EMT, bare minimum. So my expectation was that in Kalispell, when I called in for a medical welfare check, that they would send in an EMT. Nope, they sent in a deputy. No EMT, no medical, just a deputy. Nicole would not answer the door for them either, so eventually they had to jimmy the deadbolt to gain entry. Nicole was apparently in the bathroom and claimed not to have heard the door. The so-called on-site manager, Karl, and the deputy went in to check on her. Now, this part is really critical here. So remember me talking about Karl, and whenever I do mention Karl, pay attention. Because this is where what's going to happen next all focuses on. And remember, this is a Kalispell police deputy, Flathead County Sheriff's deputy, and they made no effort to even check her arm. The whole reason they were called there was to check on her arm, and they didn't check her arm. Now this is where the story diverges. The deputy called me and told me Nicole was fine. Great news, fantastic, wonderful, so happy to hear that. But she never wants to hear from you ever again. Say what? The deputy implicated that she was afraid of me, and that's why she was hiding. The deputy then told me that management, her word, management, had trespassed me off the property. This was a completely unexpected response, but it wasn't exactly given a chance to protest. I later sent another friend to get things of mine from her room, and apparently Nicole's biggest complaint was that I treated her like a child because I called the authorities and I wouldn't trust her to take care of herself. She has a massive infection in her arm that could kill her. She lives alone. There's nobody else there with her. I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm treating her childishly. I'm treating her like somebody who is a person who is at risk of harm, and I'm concerned. But that was Nicole's biggest complaint at that time, and that's important. It's an important distinction here between what the officer said and what Nicole said. She was upset with me. She was upset that the police officer was sent to her place. She was upset that I treated her like a child because I sent someone to check on her. But she didn't express that she was terrified of me. In fact, she was showing off dresses that I had bought for her. By chance, I ran into her property manager, Kelly, a few days later. She told me a more expanded version. Supposedly, Nicole had been hiding in the shower, not just the bathroom, but hiding in the shower. She said I had been abusing her, terrorizing her, and that I had been trying to break into her apartment. All this just made me sick. Because none of this was true. And I've counseled people for years against that kind of abusive control. I just had no idea why she would lie to me like that. Her choice to have me stay away lasted maybe a couple of weeks. She called me up and wanted me to come over to pay me back from money I'd spent for her. Eventually she just showed up at my door. Notably, she insisted that she never said any of that. She said she never said I terrorized her, never said I tried to break into her apartment. None of that was true, she said. I didn't believe her. At that point, I'd been told by two different people that she had said this. In law, there's something called, you have an opinion and a fact. If one person testifies to something in a court of law, it's an opinion. If two people testify to the same thing, it's considered a fact. It's called collaboration. When two people collaborated separately to tell me the same thing, I believed that Nicole was lying to me. Now, I should have realized that wasn't the case. I should have realized it. Because she doesn't lie. She deflects. And she wasn't deflecting. She was directly telling me she never said that. It was my feeling. I didn't believe her. But she started asking me for help again. She insisted there was no one else to give her rides to the appointments that she had had. And I had promised to drive her to these appointments when she made them, which is true. Which is the point I need to emphasize here. To me, if I make a promise or a commitment, it eats at me until I can complete it. It can literally feel, my skin crawls. I feel compulsively like it itches at me. Not quite like bugs are crawling under my skin, but maybe bugs are crawling on my skin, but I just can't. The compulsion to keep my word is so strong that I feel I must, if I make a promise, I must keep it if I am at all capable of doing so. So she was right. She made her point. She made her point, and I give my word, so I felt I had to deliver on my word. So I started helping her again. Now, as I was driving her around again, she started telling me about how Karl, remember the so-called on-site manager, has started looking after her and helping her with things, basically picking up where I couldn't. Later still, she told me he had started giving her things, $100 cash, quarters to do laundry, and apparently an open-ended supply of weed. Marijuana, for anybody who doesn't understand the slang term. Of course, my first response was jealousy. Are you sleeping with Karl now? She would insist Karl was just her friend. And that I needed to stop thinking that way about her. Of course, she was sleeping with him, which I will talk about soon. During this time, though, since I was not allowed on the property, I would have to pick up Nicole behind the building. So, in her words, Karl doesn't see. Now, as I was driving her around and talking to her about this, she would tell me, like for instance, I would say, you know, you need to lift this band. You need to lift this band. You need to take it off. You need to get rid of it. And she would say, well, and I would remind her that all these things she made up, the reason she got the band was for things she made up that weren't true. And she would come back, I didn't do it. You must have heard wrong. You must be remembering it wrong because I never said those things. So she kept insisting over and over and over again she never said these. She tried to deflect it back on me that I remembered it wrong because she knew she had never said it. Which technically brings up another issue, but I'm not going to delve into it because it would just go too far. I mean, off on another tangent, but she kept not lifting the band though. And apparently Karl had convinced her that he alone, being the on-site manager, could decide when she was safe. Her words, safe. She needed to be safe. Karl needed to make sure she was safe before he let me back on the property. This went on for about a month and a half, and I finally drew a line. I said, when she called me to help again, I told her, go have Tyrell help her. At that time, I was not aware of what was going on with Karl, which you'll find out here in a little bit. I had still seen Tyrell's car a couple of times driving by, so I knew he had still been visiting her. And I said, and he'd been there that morning, that night. It happened to be that night she called. I'd seen his car outside, so I knew he'd been there. So I said, just have Tyrell help. Don't call me. Why are you calling me? You don't want me on the property. You won't lift this ban. And you've got Tyrell there. What do you need me for? Well, Tyrell had already left, apparently. And I was closer at that point in time, according to her. So, and keep in mind, when I say I see his car at her place, I'm not like driving around looking at her place. Her place is visible from one of the two main arteries in town. We have Main Street and we have Idaho. They're both highways that become street names in town. They're the two main veins. You're driving from one part of town to the other. You're either going on Idaho or you're going on Main Street. So I wasn't going out of my way to look for his car. I'm driving by and literally his car is facing the street. There's no way not to see it unless I'm looking the other direction. So it's kind of hard not to notice when I'm driving around doing my normal driving around town. So I wasn't watching her place, I wasn't stalking her, but I was seeing his car there. Finally, she got Karl to drop the ban so I could drive her around again. Because I told her I was not going to do anything until that ban got dropped. I said, 2 rules. No more Tyrell. because I'm not going to deal with him being around. And you lift the ban. You lift the ban or I'm not coming back. So, and remember, Nicole had begged me shortly after this to give her time if she wanted to be with me, but she was scared, so she wanted me to be patient and blah, blah, blah. And again, she kept insisting that Karl was just her friend, nothing more. But she had more than Karl. She had another guy, turns out. That was the one about the condom wrapper on the floor, Danny. But Danny had proven to be volatile and dangerous. I mean, he just flew off temper. He was just very unstable. So when Karl decided to ban him from the property, I believe, because he saw her in this room and pulled her aside as I was walking away because I didn't want to deal with it. If he did get banned, it's a good thing because he was incredibly dangerous. He's unstable, really not a good person to be around. But then, right after I was let back on their property, her phone died. So I couldn't call her. And she wasn't answering her door. Things between Nicole and I had obviously been fractured. They'd been unstable. They'd been splintering because of the ban, because me being locked off the property. And coming back on the property was supposed to be an opportunity for us to restore trust, to try to get back our friendship. But I finally, the whole Danny thing, I said, I'm done. I'm done, and I walked away. But I still needed my ice chest because fishing season was starting. I had an ice chest that has wheels on it. And I'd been letting her use it over the winter time as an end table. And she knew that when spring came, it was time for me to go fishing, I would get my ice chest back. So this week I was planning to go fishing. That's when I realized Nicole was staying up in Karl's apartment. Because when I came by, I left a note on her door. And I left a bag of freezer pops on her door that happened to be still in the back of my van. From the time I went shopping, I didn't realize I still had. The note was gone the first day, because I come back and knock on the door. I come back and knock on the door, no answer. The freezer pops never left the door, but the note did. Which means someone came along and got the note. I'm guessing Karl. But nobody actually went back in the apartment for 3 days. So from Friday, when I first started asking, until Sunday, I went back Monday, earlier in that day, to try to get her to answer the door. No answer, and the bag was still in the door. So 3 to 4 days, the bag stayed on the door, which means she was not going into her apartment. So then Monday afternoon, she calls me from Karl's phone. It was about 6 o'clock, or 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock by that point. And she says, "Oh, I've lost my phone." Emphasis, lost her phone. It's important. And she was using Karl's phone because apparently her phone had died and she couldn't find it. Or no, she said, "I've lost my phone and I don't know where it is." That was what she used. Remember, it's very important for her to use words that are true. So when she says something, what she says will be a true statement. If she deflects and tries to talk about it another way, that's when she's lying. So she's very careful about choosing her words and how she says things. So she said, "I've lost my phone and I don't know where it is, so I'm using Karl's." All true statements with what I figured out later. But basically, in a nutshell, she wanted me to, she says, "Oh, you want to pick up your chest?" I said, "Yeah, I'm getting ready to go fishing." So she made arrangements, "Well, please pick up my medications for me." I went to pick up her medications. The pharmacy didn't have everything filled, so I had to wait until after my podcast, because Monday nights are the ones that I record podcasts. I had to wait until after my podcast to go pick up the ice chest and pick up the last of her meds and take them to her. Now, this is where things start falling into place. When I came into her place, the first thing I said, well, because she was laying down, I said, "Let me help you try to find your phone, because you need your phone." She actually started getting upset with me for trying to find her phone. "Stop doing this. Stop looking for my phone. Just stop looking for my phone. You don't need to find my phone. You don't need to find my phone." "But you need your phone." She just told me a few minutes before that she had missed her food stamp appointment because she didn't have her phone that morning. But she said this thing, and it sticks in my mind. the way she said it. She said, I'll get my phone back when it's time for me to have it. At first I thought she was just being funny and trying some Zen-like state, like, oh, the universe will let me have it when it's time for me to have it. But and I'll get to that here in a little bit, why that's significant, but that was not a Zen-like statement. She was actually making an admission. She didn't lose her phone because she misplaced it. I'm just going to talk about it now. She didn't lose her phone because she misplaced it. She lost it and didn't know where Karl had put it. So when she said, I lost the phone and don't know where it is, it was a 100% true statement. She lost her phone because she lost her privilege to the phone, thanks to Karl, and she didn't know where Karl had put it. And when she said, I'll get my phone back when it's time for me to have it, she was acknowledging that she had to wait for the right time when Karl decided it was time for her to have her phone again. By the way, she has not had her phone since at least last Friday. It is now Friday again. Since at least last Friday. She's not had her phone for 8 days. And the phone has been off the entire time. Because I keep trying to call her to make sure she gets her phone. Stupid, I know, but I feel the need to try to make sure she gets her phone back. 8 days she's been without her phone. You don't misplace your phone for 8 days. She only has a one-room little apartment. She does not lose her phone for 8 days. Karl decided that when I got back on the property, the only way he was going to let me back on the property was to make sure she could not call me back. He then made a point of keeping her up in his room to make sure that if I dropped by, I wouldn't be able to talk to her. He was still maintaining control over her with the phone. Now, I once again confronted her about Karl because she'd been up in his room for 3 days. She admitted that much. She even told me that, he was at work. I said, why, he goes to work. Why were you up in his room? Because he wanted me to stay up there. He wanted her to stay in his room while he was at work. And keep in mind, these are just one little room, little places. They aren't like full apartments. We're talking one room, main room, and a bathroom. They're basically studios. They're converted hotel rooms. Okay, there's not much space to these things. He wanted her to stay in his room, his apartment, while he was at work. Like I said, I once again confronted her about it. She'd been up there for 3 days. Reminded her that she was the one who had asked me to be patient because she wanted time to think about us, whether she wanted to try to pursue something with me. I said, you're staying 3 days up in Karl's apartment. Don't treat me like I'm stupid. Just admit it. So finally she says, after saying, look, yes or no, are you sleeping with him or not? She would say, well, sleeping can mean multiple things. Again, deflection. You know what I'm talking about. Yes or no, Nicole, did you sleep? Are you sleeping with Karl? And she responded, I don't feel comfortable talking about what me and Karl do. That was about as close to an admission I was going to get. She didn't feel comfortable talking about sleeping with him. So, yeah, that was the acknowledgement. I told her she needed to make up her mind. I said, a reminder, you told me you wanted me to wait for you, and now you're off sleeping with someone else. So you either take all of me, or you get none of me. Because I'm not doing this piecemeal stuff. I'm only going to be around for the things you want. You either take me completely, or go be with Karl. And when she wouldn't answer, I left. And that's the last time I've seen her heard from her. Now, after I went home, the things she had said, they started falling into place. And I don't know why they didn't fall in place sooner. After all, with my vast experience with dealing with abuse control relationships, I should have seen it. But I was only seeing it from the outside in bits and pieces, and it wasn't until I started going over the details in my head after I went home that night, after I went home Monday, that I realized what it meant. When she said she lost her phone, she was upset with me looking for it. She was dealing with all this stuff about how, she would get it back when it was time for her to have it back. I realized what she'd been saying. Karl had taken her phone, and she was not allowed to have it back yet. And he was going to decide when she could have it back. And all the gifts and attention, the $100, the quarters, the weed, it's classic grooming. Gifting someone to gain attention and affection, that's step one of the abuse control cycle. That's gratification. it's the whole point of trying to get their affection is to give them gifts, to lure them in. Extravagant gifts, $100 cash, here's some quarters due laundry, here's some weed. Constantly, never ending apparently. And his insistence that he alone could lift the ban, he was isolating her from me. He was making conscious choices to make sure she didn't go to anyone else but him to lift the ban. Because so long as he controlled it in her mind, he got to decide whether I got to come back, which means he got to keep her alone, once again, isolating her. Which is also why she was trying to hide when I was picking her up, because Karl didn't want me to be around her. It had all been part of an abuse control cycle. Karl wants Nicole alone to manipulate and control her. And obviously, so he could sleep with her himself. Karl was never Nicole's friend. Karl was and is a predator. But good luck getting Nicole to see that now. He's had months to condition her. And as I said before, she's incredibly susceptible because she's been preconditioned to be controlled and manipulated and abused. And he's had 3 months unfettered access to her. Once I realized this, I saw a huge ethical and moral issue. Karl had been using his position of authority over Nicole to have his way with her. He was a representative of the apartment complex who was using his position as manager to control her, to possess her, and to cut her off from any other outside support. So I called the actual manager, Kelly. And I told her, this is a huge ethical issue, that he's using his position of authority to isolate her. He's sleeping with her now because he's controlled and dominated her. He's the one who would not lift the ban, and when he did lift the ban, he's cut her off from all contact. And she says, this is where things really get interesting. It turns out Karl was never the on-site manager. He had no authority in the building whatsoever. He had just been left a set of keys in case people got locked out. That was it. That's the end-all and be-all. He had no management. He had no control over the bands. He had no control over who was on or off the property. He had nothing. He was no representative of the business. He'd been telling people, me included, that he was the on-site manager. And he'd been doing it for months. And the management of this business had to have known. In fact, one of the things Kelly told me when I was on the phone with her was that she'd already been planning to have a conversation with Karl about this. And she had hoped to wait till the 1st of April because that's when the owners came back. But she realized after what I was telling her, she needed to talk to him sooner. So she'd already been aware of this problem of him misrepresenting the business for who knows how long. Claiming to represent the business, claiming to be the on-site manager. She knew about this. And she waited. And that's what gave Karl the ability to continue to convince Nicole and me and anybody else who he told that he was actually the management on site. But he had no authority. He had never authority to ban anyone. He had much less to lift a ban, which is important. Because the ban was not lifted. I was not supposed to be back on the property. And telling Nicole that he had the power to do so was just a way to control her. I also confirmed that Kelly was the one who had actually issued the trespass against me, but only because Karl told her the details, the made-up story about her hiding in the shower, about me trying to break into the apartment, about me terrorizing her. All of that came from Karl. She admitted that. She had never talked to Nicole. She issued the trespass because Karl told her these details. And the deputy likewise was just parroting what Karl had told her. So all that made up garbage came from Karl. And that trespass had never actually been lifted. So the whole plan was that if I get caught on the property, I get arrested, and he, again, accomplishes what he wants to, which is keeping me away from Nicole. He'd obviously been watching Nicole. He'd set her eyes on her, probably been obsessing her, watching her for some time, and he saw an opportunity to get me out of the way. Then spent the next 2 months grooming and manipulating her to be his own. Turns out he only let me back on the property to get caught by Kelly. FYI, just be fair, Kelly thinks he would have called her if that was the case. I don't think so. I think Karl wanted to make it look like he wasn't involved. He didn't want blood on his hands. If he called Kelly and Kelly responded because he called her, then Nicole would see that. And he was trying to make Nicole think he was the good guy. Oh, I let Ron back on, but Kelly apparently didn't think so, and Kelly had him Put it all on Kelly, never on him. Abuse, control, deflection. And then he took her phone away. Once he supposedly lifted the ban, he took the phone away to control her, to make sure she couldn't talk to me. He kept her up in his room for days at a time to make sure that I couldn't talk to her. I couldn't drop by and talk to her. I couldn't talk to her on the phone. The only method she had to call or talk to anyone was his phone when he was present. So he got to control who she talked to and got to overhear any conversations. So, without a phone and keeping her out of her place, he still cut me off from talking to her, except in the circumstances he controlled. It meant that even when he supposedly let me back on the property, he could still keep us apart. And the really bad part is that because I was still trespassed, I could have been arrested. For the records, I am in talks with Kelly to resolve the trespass issue. But the damage at this point is done. Karl has Nicole under his influence, and there is no way I can get her back. She trusts Karl obviously more than me. He believes all his lies. And that's the problem with going up against someone who lies, cheats, and steals. You can rarely beat them by being honest and honorable. That is, after all, why I am where I am as a political prisoner in Montana. There's a quote I always give, and I've given it here a few times. I'll give it again. A lie is far easier to believe than the truth, for it can be molded to the ear of the listener. The truth, by comparison, is far more rigid and less likely to be believed. I can't beat Karl at a game of deceptive power and control. He has had her under his thrall for too long. He has had absolute power over her for months. Deceptively so, wrongly so, but he has. And without resorting to some nefarious plot, beating him up, or trying to in some way cause him harm through a lie, deception, make up some false charge or nonsense, play the abuse control game right back at him, I don't see the damage being undone. So yeah, Nicole's lost to me. And it's because the actual business sat back and let someone pretend to represent them. Technically, this is called alienation of affection, and it's actually an actionable civil tort. I could sue the business for a lot of damages here. But honestly, all I'd really want out of any action would be to have Nicole back. The Nicole I knew, the Nicole I want to be back. And I could not get that from a lawsuit. So anyways, the reason for me telling you all this is that my producer took issue with how I came to potentially getting arrested. The risk I had, that what Karl did, how he manipulated the circumstances, how I could have been arrested from what he did. All because Karl lied about the trespass being lifted to lure me back on the property so that Kelly could discover me and have me arrested. So he'd have his hands clear, he'd still get me away from Nicole, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, Bill feels that my helping others puts me at risk. He's not wrong, mind you. Someone can make up anything if they're around me. I mean, I'm around them, they can make up stuff. Someone on the outside can make up stuff. If I'm giving someone a ride and they have drugs on them, for instance, yeah, they could say they're my drugs. I could go to jail. Or if someone decides to make up allegations of inappropriate conduct, like claim I'm stealing from someone that I'm helping or taking advantage of in some way. Or, you know, I give a girl directions that I'm making a sexual solicitation. And I said he's not necessarily wrong. I can be blamed, but I can be blamed by something just in a public place. If a kid waves at me in a grocery store, as an example, I could be accused of trying to solicit something from him. If a girl asks for directions, you know, sure, I'm making a sexual advance on her. So my position is that the powers that be want to have me falsely charged, I'm absolutely powerless to stop them from making up something. So whether I'm doing it because I'm helping somebody, or I'm in public, or they just come to my house. I've had 2 separate Kalispell Police Department officers tell me years ago that about half the cops in this town carry drop bags. And just so you know, a drop bag is when you carry a little bit of drugs in a bag so you can drop it on a perp that you want framed for something. You want to arrest them for something, and you don't have a reason to, drop a bag, now you have a reason to take them to jail. In the old days, it was a throwaway piece of gun. Now it's a drop bag. But in a town where a cop can just drop a bag from his pocket and blame me, honestly, what can I possibly do to protect myself from a made-up charge? So by my producer's reasoning, each and every time I help someone, I risk being framed. In this case, I believe that was Karl's plan, to lure me back on the property, get caught, and go to jail. All the better way to keep me away from Nicole. Only by calling the actual manager, only by calling her, calling Kelly, did I avoid that. He's not wrong in his reasoning. But not helping people or exposing myself in this way does nothing to protect me. If someone wants to set me up, I'm at their mercy. It doesn't have to be for me helping them. I am powerless to stop someone from making up a crime. So should I stop being who I am? Stop helping others because of that risk? Maybe if it was an isolated risk, but it's not. And by extension of this reasoning, any association could put me at risk. And lest we forget, I'm putting out podcast episodes twice a week, exposing corruption and calling out corrupt people. You want to talk about putting myself at risk? This is putting me at risk, ladies and gentlemen. Every single time I open my mouth, it puts me at risk. So where do I draw a line at risk? Because I have to avoid any and all risk. That means shutting myself in a bunker. I can't avoid the possibility that someone will make up something about me. I went to prison once already for that very reason. And if they choose to do it again, I cannot stop them. So changing who I am and hiding my desire to help others, that's pretty much a non-starter. But if I'm being honest, the conversation has only renewed my anxiety over making these podcasts. Even as I'm recording this, I'm questioning the wisdom of continuing. Seriously, where do I draw the line at risk? Where do I draw? Do I draw the line at helping others? Do I draw the line at making the podcasts? Do I draw the line at filing legal papers? Do I just sit in a hole and with my cats and hope that, the world comes to an end someday and the restrictions go away? Especially when doing this right here, doesn't really seem to be doing anything positive. It's only potentially making things harder for me. Is the risk really necessary? Should I keep doing this? Should I? And that's the question that's been bouncing around in my head all week. And yet here I am. I'm doing it. So, I don't know. It's hard. And this week I lost someone that's very important to me. More lies, more manipulations, more things I'm powerless over. So, there we have it. The weaknesses created by the Great Montana Conspiracies, framing of me for a crime I didn't commit, makes me susceptible to risk. It does. Because my producer's not wrong in that. But where do you draw the line at it? As always, if you're watching this video on YouTube, please take the time to like and subscribe. Likewise, any other platform in which you can. Visit monspiracy.podbean.com if you do not see a text attached to this video. Or again, the Great Montana Conspiracy Podcast on YouTube will be the same thing. I thank you for your time. And as always, please be safe. And whenever possible, please be free. Thank you.